going. All right. So welcome everybody. We'll go ahead and get started since we're kind of rolling already. A couple people I want to introduce here, as you kind of heard a little bit of our prep talk. This is round two of the three-part SBIR webinar series hosted by Arizona Commerce Authority. We do this on a fairly regular basis, 2, 3, 4 times a year. My name is Wiley Larson. I'm the director of SBIR programs and university partnerships at Arizona Commerce Authority. I've got a couple of awesome people here on our webinar today, including Dan Sewer, who is our presenter. And Dan, am I saying that right? I think I said that.
Yeah, Sewer, sir. You can call me sir if you want.
Sir, we'll call you sir.
Yeah.
All right. Sir, Mr. Sir, thank you. It's Dr. Sir, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right, Dr. Sir. So we're really glad to have you. I really enjoyed the first webinar 2 weeks ago, and the questions that we had from everyone, and so we're glad to have you back as well. Also want to introduce Lou Farina. Lou is the SBIR man at the Small Business Development Center in Maricopa County, Arizona. Lou, do you want to say hello and say a few words?
Sure. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. Thanks, Wiley. Thanks, Dan. It's nice to be here, and I'm sorry I couldn't make the first one. I was able to sit in last year with Dan for all three, and I'm really happy he's back because he, as you probably have figured out during the first session, that he's extremely knowledgeable and really helpful, and we're really happy to have him here in Arizona. I am a local resource in Arizona, SBDC, and available to assist with SBIRs on a no-fee basis. So thanks very much.
You bet. Glad to have you. A great asset to the community, and the services that SBDC provides are amazing. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dan. And if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I think we'll probably take, like we did last time, we'll kind of take it in segments a little bit. So if you have like long questions and you don't want to type it all out, we'll kind of find a good, sort of transition break in what's being presented, and allow you to ask those at that time, and then again at the end as well. So with that, Dan, thanks again for being here. It's all yours.
Thanks, Wiley. Yeah, I'm happy to be here, and I'm, the main things we wanted to talk about today. So last time we went ahead and talked about different agencies, generally what was going on. I introduced you guys to the idea of a concept write-up, and that's just basically 250 words of what's the problem, what's the innovation, what research do I need to do to prove that my innovation is feasible, and how is the world a better place, what's the impact of that, was sort of the structure that we'd like to do. So we'll talk about that a little bit. We'll review that a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit more about agencies. One of the things that came out of it recently, or last week or 2 weeks ago, is I was thinking more about the idea of which topics work in which agencies, so I can share that with you guys. Then we're going to do just a quick review of the concept write-up, and let's say that I saw about a half a dozen concept write-ups come through, and want to talk a little bit about the good stuff I saw, and then some of the weaknesses I saw in the write-ups, which probably has more to do with me not explaining things very well, or what I wanted very well. So that's usually how that works. Then we're going to talk about technical objectives, or what they call specific aims for NIH. Just touch about the idea of the innovation in context, trying to get your innovation, put it into the right context of how it fits within the industry, within the technology. So it's more sort of just the introduction to technology roadmaps, or product roadmaps. Then we're going to talk quite a bit about work plans, and then we're going to talk about how the work plan and the budget are really tied together. One of the, a minute ago, at the very top of the link is, very top of the chat is a link to NIH. They actually have some example proposals out there. And remember from the last week, even though all these agencies are different, they're still looking for that same thing. What's the problem? What's the innovation? Tell us what the work plan is, and go ahead and, how does it have, what kind of impact does it have? So even though it's just NIH, they have some really nice samples of those things. So I would look at that if you want to. So this is sort of what I was thinking about last week. I was like going, I sort of broke up into topic ideas, agriculture, AI, and advanced computing, these sort of broad topic areas that are out there. And what I was doing that for is I wanted to show everybody that, a lot of these broad topic areas, there's many places, many different agencies that it can work in. So like AI and advanced computing, like every agency has a place for AI and advanced computing, believe it or not. So, it's just a question of where your technology fits and how it fits in. And then also, whether there's a topic for you, if it's a case of a Department of Defense or somebody who is a contracting agency, like we talked about. This is, I always believe, so for me, because I've mostly worked, NIH, NSF, USDA, I don't know if I've seen a proposal that I submitted or helped submit to one of those agencies that we couldn't find a place to live in another one of those three agencies. So it's almost always, some crossover opportunities. This is a little bit more, just once again, the different agencies, whether they're a grant or a contract agencies, those make a big difference only from the standpoint that the contract agencies are, you have to find a specific topic that your technology would fit in, or have enough of a relationship with the people that are potentially writing topics that they write a topic that fits your technology. The other thing that's sort of come up out of these concept write-ups, the feedback that we've been getting last week or so is, it seems like some people's technology is probably beyond a phase one, that if the agency they're targeting can do a direct to phase two, there's one that does that, that might be a better choice. So keep in mind that there are different types of awards, fast tracks. NIH has fast tracks, but some institutes in NIH use a fast track, some allow it, some don't. Same thing with direct to phase two. So you have to go look at the RFAs and decide, what actual choices are available as far as award types. We're mostly concentrating on the idea of the phase ones here. Phase twos, have quite a bit different structure from the standpoint that you have a longer commercialization plan that you get to submit. And also there's a big part of your plan or the proposal that would be a review of the phase one, or if it's a direct to phase two, it would be more of a review of the previous work that you've done, your preliminary studies. All right, so back to the concept write-up. I probably should talk slower, otherwise you guys are gonna have a lot of time for questions. But what I keep on wanting to do here is say that whether it's a concept write-up, the summary abstract, the specific aims or elevator pitch, or a full proposal, it's really these four components that we're concentrating on. The problem, the innovation, sort of a work plan, and the outcome or impact. So if we always keep that in mind, it just makes it so much simpler to to know that all I'm doing for the full proposal is I'm taking that problem sentence that you did in your 250 words and making it a page or 2 pages. Innovation that was 2 or 3 sentences in your 250 words becomes, a page or 2 page. So you just, each sentence becomes a paragraph or 2. You get to use graphics. All those things happen, but it's really just, expanding upon that, each one of those pieces. Let's see. So once again, this is what we did with the concept write-up. The idea around the concept write-up is it's really short. The reason we want to have it short is that we're going to use this concept write-up to recruit, well, first to interact hopefully with the program manager, with the paint on the agency. So like, for instance, USDA, NIH, you could send a concept write-up to a program manager, say, hey, does this fit in your institute? Does this fit on your topic? All those questions. That's a way of starting a dialogue with somebody and giving them enough information that they understand what's going on. In case of NIH, I usually use the concept write-up in the email, and the bottom of the email under my signature block, I'll cut and paste like more of the specific aims, the 1-page thing, but because they're used to seeing that structure. So every agency is a little bit different, but it's truly, what's the problem? What problem are you trying to solve? And you have to put it, go ahead in this, if you put it in layman's terms, what problems you're trying to solve, that's so helpful to me, and to anybody reading it. So sometimes it's a problem that takes a while to understand or is more difficult to explain. A lot of times problems are pretty intuitive, that people understand, okay, this is what the problem is. So, or I know that problem exists myself, so I don't, sometimes in these proposals, you don't have to spend a lot of time explaining what the problem is, because everybody's going to already agree that there's a problem. So the innovation is how you're solving that problem. What does your technology do? And then the work plan is really the guts of, somebody's going to give you $300,000 or $275,000 or $125,000. Somebody's going to give you some chunk of money to prove the feasibility of something. So to prove that feasibility, what are you doing with that money? What research has to be done to make that happen? And we'll talk about that more in the work plan structure. And if we do all that stuff, here's the outcome and impact that we're going to have. Observations on the write-up that I saw, some of the concept write-ups. I think everybody has done a really good job on identifying the problems to solve. I think the innovations are pretty well described in most cases, but it feels like, and we'll get to it today, but it feels like the work plan, what research you want to do for that $300,000. Let's just use $300,000 from now on. But what research you're going to do for that $300,000? How does that? What are you doing? What steps need to be taken? And how do you know that sort of you're done? When we do this, we prove it's feasible, and then ultimately in phase 2, we'll do these other steps. The other thing is, I had a few discussions with people about the past award. So if you go ahead and go to the past awards in SBIR.gov, and it's actually portfolio is where you go to, and you can see the past awards and do some keyword searches. And their system is not working super well, but it's sort of the best you have. So after you almost have to reset it every time you click any keys or put in a keyword and do one search, then you have to go back and do it again. It's a little clunky right now. Hopefully they fix it. But go look for keywords, and so you understand what agencies have been funding the kind of technology or the kind of innovation that you're proposing. What have other people done? Sometimes it's helpful to go look at those projects or even the website of those companies and see, have they actually done anything with that technology? Are they farther ahead than you or not? So SBIR.gov is a great place to start. There's agency specific areas, places you can go to look for awards. One of those is Reporter for NIH. So if you're doing NIH work, Reporter is amazing because you get sort of all the research that's going on. So if you put in a keyword, you can ask specifically for SBIR awards, or you can just keep it open to the RO1s and the UO1s and all those things that where you might actually run into a researcher that's working in the same space as you that you might want to pull into your team. So USDA has it. It's DoD is the hardest place to go find past awards, more detail on them, because you sort of end up having to. It seems like besides SBIR.gov, it seems like for DoD you have to go to each of the branches and look at their past awards if you want to. All right, so we talked about all that fun stuff. So let's talk about the technical objectives and sort of the context of innovation. So the technical objective that we're trying to do. So, all right, with the whole, looking at all agencies, they call them different things. Sometimes they call them technical objectives. Sometimes they call them specific aims. Sometimes it just depends on the agency. So I sort of look at, could be your hypothesis even. Some people even talk about that way. But this is overall for the whole project is how I look at this as the technical objective. My objective is to cure cancer or to, match mentors and mentees more easily, or make it easier for firefighters to track their exposure to hazardous material. And then to do that, or to prove that's feasible, I'm going to do these specific aims or these research objectives that follow that. So to prove that I can collect the data for firefighters more effectively, I need sensors to collect data. I need some kind of a computer system to keep track of things. I probably need some artificial intelligence stuff that would actually keep track of where people are in relationship to each other. So if you are a firefighter and you're standing next to another firefighter who has sensors on them, that the system knows that you've probably been exposed to the same things. What I want to do is I want to show you, so measurable goals, align with our project problem statement. We have to talk about in the context of innovation and technical merit, the feasibility and approach, the time frame, the milestones, who's doing the work, why are you doing that, the expected outcomes from each, or deliverables, I would say, from each task that you're doing, and then sort of the idea of risk mitigation. Sometimes you'll see a paragraph in the proposal that just talks about risk mitigation, what are the risks for the project. Sometimes you'll see people talk about it for each specific aim. We'll go look at this NIH example here. I think that would be the simplest thing to do. Stop sharing and share something else if Wiley lets me. Let's see if I can find something else to share. All right. Let's see. Let's go. I think it's this one. All right. So the cool thing about NIH, and hopefully if you guys aren't seeing this, let me know, but it should look like a PDF with a lot of words on it, is sort of what it is at this moment. So if you guys don't see that, let me know. So the cool thing with NIH is they'll give you they give samples. Well, the NIAID gives you samples that are fundamentally everything, a whole proposal for somebody. So you can, so this is a proposal from these therapeutics guys. And you'll see all these pieces in here. So they have the cover page, they have performance sites. These are, if you did an NIH proposal, this is what a whole proposal would look like. Phase 1 proposal would look like. So you, and you'll fill out all this stuff. It's pretty straightforward, but here's a project summary, which is almost like our concept write-up. Project narrative, and I have never understood the difference between a narrative and a summary. The narrative is supposed to be more layman's terms, but and facilities and all this stuff, but this is exactly what the package looks like that the reviewer looks at. And here's biographical sketches for this person, but I really want, and then we'll run by the budget and the budget justification. But I really want to show you guys what this work plan stuff looks like. So there's budget justification. All right, and so here's this for NIH. You get 7 pages in total. The first page is specific aims. They're 1 page, and in this case, what they're trying to do is, their aims are show that MPCs can be used to induce tolerant or lung transplant, induce tolerance for lung transplant in a mouse model, and determine the degree of mismatch stuff. So, all right, so that's way, way above my pay grade. I have no clue what these guys are going to end up doing, but I can, I'll go through this proposal pretty slowly. For NIH, we have this idea of significance, and that's the same thing I keep on talking about is the problem. All right. Then they actually have a section called innovation, which is sort of interesting. Their innovation section is only that long. And the cool thing about this is that this is a funded proposal. So there's no right or wrong way. I mean, you need to follow the rules, but if you want to make a innovation section longer or shorter, that's fine. And sometimes there's things in the approach section that get shoved into the innovation section, just depending upon the people. But so approach is really starting to talk about our work plan, is what the approach is. See, they have preliminary studies here, and I personally like preliminary studies in the innovation section. Is where I prefer it. All right, but then we get into their different names. Here's aim 1, and what they're going to do here, it seemed like it worked. They talk about the work that's getting done, the milestones that'll happen. How do you know when you're done? Here's the details of the model. So this is exactly how are they. It's sort of like a recipe. We'll always have a recipe and it has an ingredients, but then you have sort of the work plan or the instructions to get your recipe done. And that's really what's in this work plan. It's that much detail. And in this case, these researchers talk about potential problems, and that's the risk mitigation I was just talking about. So they do it for each of their 2 aims. But that's, they have a division of work, and talk about their models and stuff like that. So it's a lot of detail. And here they include their timeline and this is something that's required by NIH, and it's actually useful for everywhere, for any agency. But once again, this timeline, I like to put at the beginning of the approach section. And then finally they end up saying, okay, if we do this, prove it's feasible in phase 2, this is what we're going to do. So let me stop sharing that and get back to the other thing. So look at those work plans, look at those samples that are out there. And I have like my own NIH and USDA, probably NSF plans out there too that I can share if you guys would like to see that kind of thing at some point. I'm willing to show them to you on the computer. I probably wouldn't send them to you.
Hey, Dan,
Yeah.
if you got, is this a good time for a question?
Absolutely. Every time's a good time for a question.
Okay. Okay. Michelle, I'm going to go ahead and let you talk. Go right ahead.
I just wanted to ask, where can we get those samples?
Yeah, it's in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's a link in the chat. So it's this thing right here, though. The NIAID. And
Okay.
and they have some really I don't know, to me it's amazingly cool. It's very helpful because you just have to put your hat on that the work plans, the structure of the things might be different from NSF to NIH, but the guts of what they're asking for need to be the same. You know, the idea of the work plan and the real level of detail that you need to talk about. You need to show everybody that you know how to do these experiments, you know what the right terminology is, you know that what state of the art is in that space. So don't think about it as an example of just NIH. Think about it in the context of, you know, I'm going to have to do the same kind of explaining with NSF, with DOD, with any of them. It's still the
Right.
same pieces. So
Mhm.
think about it that way. But they have some good things. They have phase 1, phase 2 that they show fast tracks. And the other nice thing is for some of the samples they have out there, they actually have the reviewers' comments. So you can see what the reviewer said about that phase 1 proposal. So that, to me, that's pretty valuable.
It is. Thank you.
Sure.
Dan, we also had a question about uh, Greg was asking, so the reason we review past awards is to find keywords. Could you expand a little bit on the idea of keywords as far as how that benefits or helps the applicant?
Well, I was just saying we use keywords to find the past awards. So if it's
Okay.
something in your technology that's unique to your technology, I would be using those keywords to try to find those past awards to see if it's, you know, if it matches or find something that matches. You know, there's tens of thousands of past awards out there. And sometimes you'll find matches from 2010. I mean, I've seen people like going down, you know, looking at some a new approach to technology that died 10 years ago, but 10 years ago somebody did a proposal that's quite a bit the same, and it's worthwhile to look at the abstract, look at what the company did. Sometimes you can figure out if they got other funding sources, what did they actually end up doing. But that's the, for me, those, you know, using the right keywords to try to find similar proposals, or see, like probably in Greg's case, there might be some components of what he's doing that might actually be in previous awards, stuff like that. So that's the value of trying to get that done. All right. The so it's sort of a weird here. So we have our technical objectives, and one of the things that we're challenged to do is what makes our innovation new, better, smarter, faster, cuter, you know, whatever those words are. What, you know, why is it worthwhile to go down the rabbit hole of your innovation? And that's what we're trying to do, is put your innovation in context of what's going on in the marketplace now. You know, I I had a colleague years and years ago that always talked about, you know, that there's always something that's your competition, because that something that's your competition might be nothing at all, that nobody's ever wanted to solve that problem because it's not worth solving, or it's too hard to solve, or whatever. So doing nothing is your potentially your competition. um, but if but you know, is your innovation, you know, can we apply it? How does it fit in this context? So one of the ways of doing that is this idea of technology roadmaps. And, you know, I've helped teach whole whole week-long seminars on technology roadmaps and how to look at them. But these technology roadmaps, a lot of times, or industry roadmaps, is a industry group, IEEE, some kind of a chip group, something like that. They might put together a roadmap of this is where the technology is going to go in, flexible displays or some kind of sensors or whatever the case is. And you can find these roadmaps online if you look for specifically, semiconductor roadmaps. A lot of times, if you search specifically on .gov sites, you might be able to find, government created roadmaps. But why that's important is we need to put your innovation in the context of the roadmap. Because I built a display, my display is going to use 1/10 the amount of power as somebody as the state of the art right now. This is what can happen to batteries. This is what, for our phones, this is what a phone could look like. So those are the contexts that we're trying to get our innovation into that context. And also the other really important thing is that, we're trying to build credibility in our proposals. So if we can talk about that, we understand what's going on in the space, that ability to talk about those things is what gives us that credibility. If we, keep in mind that many of these, when these things get reviewed, these proposals get reviewed, you have a pretty broad range of people that are looking at them that are experts in some field usually. I mean, sometimes it's a pretty broad review panel that's looking at things, but they generally know what's going on, and they probably also generally have some of their own biases about approaches. I think I told the story last time about my Alzheimer guy in Arizona. I worked with Alzheimer's company who's still out and about and around, but they had a more of a physical or electronic approach to treating Alzheimer's compared to the pharmaceutical approaches. And it was the biases towards pharmaceuticals in those review panels as far as treatment of Alzheimer's was pretty apparent. So that was a pretty tough thing. So basically you need to point to that research. You sort of have to convince somebody that your approach, your innovation works in this context, that it's building upon other things that have been found, other people's research, things like that. So we're trying to build that credibility in there. How fast are things changing? Are there any dependent technologies? Now this is great. I got this great thing, but unfortunately I need a battery the size of, a small building to run my innovation. And, what I need is something the size of a suitcase to run my innovation. So are there technologies that for your innovation to work or to be deployed, are there technologies that need to come along faster? And that's actually, in some ways, that's a good way of breaking up somebody's project into multiple proposals. I mean, there's no reason that if your innovation is rely upon new battery technology, new display technology, software, or AI, whatever, there's no reason you can't take each of those components and make a proposal out of each of those components to build up your whole your product to get there to the end. And actually there's also, I've been part of groups that have actually gotten SBIRs to innovate in the way things are manufacturing so they could actually manufacture their product too. So there's a lot of flexibility in that regard. So don't think of this as one proposal for your product. Think of this as, let's break the product up into a lot of pieces and have, multiple proposals for your product. Let's see. The other thing, the other thing, we need to be able to say that this is a way that these are the half a dozen ways that people are doing, reaching these goals now. I'm selecting this other way, or this one of these 6 ways. And the reason I'm selecting that process or method is because you have your reasons to do that. So that's important, to make sure that you understand what competitive approaches to the problem or to the solution are. And then the last thing is, that the idea is systematically mapping the science and technology to the different products that are there is also, ultimately beneficial. So I think, well, this is a little bit crazy. Here's a roadmap example that is actually from a very, very long time ago. It's almost 20 years old, or probably more than 20 years old. And it's from a phone company, U.S. phone company, and basically their roadmap. So this is time that goes from left to right, and these are the features of the product, and these are pieces of technology, whether they're being developed internally, externally, if people are doing research on them. But all these things this is how they expect their product to actually evolve over time. So they have a 5+ year timeline out here of, this is how this product is going to evolve over this time. So this is these things can be 1-page long, graphically shown like this, that you might run into something like this. They could be, I've seen 100-page documents talking about the roadmap and breaking things down all narratively. So either one of those things can happen, but this is a pretty helpful tool. So like, for instance, if you're working in audio quality, or your innovation was in one of these pieces and it could be used in a phone line, if you were doing a chip set or something to do with some kind of software, you can sort of, for this company, or you could talk about where your product, your innovation would change that. I think, a good example of that is, there's a company that does chips for imaging machines. So their product goes into a big MRI type machine or CAT scan type machine. And one of the problems with this machines, especially like micro CTs, is that they just take a long time to process and move things along. So taking a micro CT takes forever, and they came up with this new chip and new way to do things faster, but their customer is GE Imaging or somebody like that. But so their chip is just one small component of their GE's bigger product that they actually commercialize. So their chip would show up on a product, for GE. They probably have a product roadmap that says, okay, we need to innovate around this chip, and they happen to find a company that's done that got some SBIR money and is be able to chase that down. But that's, so think about it that way, that your product might fit into another company's product roadmap, or their technology plan or technology roadmap. So all right, so now let's talk, and it's sort of weird to go from, but the innovation in context is important because we're going to talk about that a little bit in the work plan. And so let's talk about work plans. And think about it this way, is sort of, you get this work plan structure, there's this really big picture. It's like, I want to cure cancer, okay, that's all well and good. Well, we're probably not going to do it in a $306,000 NIH SBIR, but you're going to come up with smaller questions, is what we're doing. So from the big picture, cure cancer, from that we're going to have these smaller questions, which gets us to our phase 1 objective. Is, our smaller questions might be, can we use this kind of method or this kind of drug to take care of breast cancer? And from there, from that question, so this objective might be, okay, we're going to use let's do a medical device. We're going to use a medical device that does some kind of electromagnetic disruption and messes up breast cancer, that treats breast cancer. We're going to prove if that's feasible. All right. So that's our technical objective. Is that feasible to use that? And to that, we end up with the multiple research questions or aims, like in the case of aims in the case of NIH. But your research questions are going to be, all right, does this electrical disruption actually kill the cells? So you might be testing things in the lab of how that works. Research question 2 might be, what is the limit of that kind of electromagnetic energy to human skin? I mean, there's going to be these multiple questions that you might have that are going to influence or prove whether something's feasible or not. And then to each one of those questions, and we try to keep those questions or those aims, I would call them, to 2 or 3 for a phase 1 project. If you get too many aims, it always seems like too much work to the reviewers, and you have too much to explain. But each one of these aims ends up being tasked. So within there, to test in the lab, this disruption of this electromagnetic field that I'm going to do, here are the tasks I have to do. I have to culture some cells. I have to do something. But it's just, once again, it's the instructions. I'm going to do this. This is the first part. This is how I'm going to measure it. This is how I know if I'm done. What is measurable? What are the deliverables out of this question? And I'm going to show you a whole bunch of different ways of thinking about this, because everybody thinks a little bit differently. So this might work for somebody, this idea of, okay, I'm going to take it, explode it out into task, from objective to questions to task. The overview, or, when you're writing this thing, it's sort of like, what are the tasks to be performed? What are the outputs of each task? How long will it take? Is there special knowledge or equipment needed? Who will perform it? Is it you, or is it, a subcontractor or a consultant? Where will the work be completed? Sort of your knowledge of the state of the art. A lot of times, especially with NIH, you end up with proposal. You only have, the 7 pages of proposals, so you don't have a lot of time to describe a method. But if something's already some kind of ISO method, or there's the IEEE standard for this kind of test, or a construction standard, or ASTM, or if you can point to somebody else's research and say, as described by, Dr. Hockalock in this paper, that shows that what's going on in the space, that you're not sort of making this up as you go, that that there's some standard ways of doing that, and that's usually helpful to showing the state of the art. And I don't know, it feels like I can't say this enough, is that this is really the guts of your proposal. To me, this is the guts of your proposal. This is, you have clear objectives, and now you're showing everybody that how to do the research and you can get it done, and that you're going to have some measurable deliverables at the end that show you are done, that you should prove that it is feasible. I mean, that's what we're trying to do here, is prove something is feasible, and this is the guts of what's going on here. So another way of looking at it, this is Enable Ventures out of Arkansas does this work plan. It's sort of a matrix or a worksheet where they have the specific aims, the tasks that are needed to answer the questions, the task outputs or deliverables. What are the quantitative results or goal for each one? for each task, how long is it going to take, what personnel or skills or names and locations are needed, how many hours is needed, what kind of equipment, facilities, is it a subcontractor and or consultant that are doing it. And then I have here in yellow is the human trials or animal testing. Is there any of that? And truly, for a lot of times in phase ones, I try to stay away from that, because once we definitely human trials, but animal testing, even that becomes a little bit problematic unless you're affiliated with the university, because you have to get, I forget what the numbers are called. I'm sure there's some scientists out there that can help us here, but there's like these animal numbers that each university or each research institute has these numbers and has a panel that reviews the protocol for the research and stuff like that, and make sure that the animal safety and is pain and the like is not too arduous. But that's one way of looking at. The other way I like looking at it is all we're doing in this work plan. We got these components. We got these research questions, and we have inputs. This process, which from my political science days, we always talk about processes of black box. That's why it's a black box here. For science, it should probably not be such a black box, but we got inputs, we got process, we got outputs. The inputs are who, what, when, where, people, material, facilities, programming languages, season of the year. The process is the protocol, the equipment, time, money. So how are you actually getting this done? And then the output are different milestones, findings, reports, designs, prototype, feasibility, but you end up with outputs. And this structure is important, because when we look at if we're doing multiple proposals, you're going to have to answer a question that's going to ask if you've submitted same or similar proposals to another agency, and we want that answer to be no. I mean, if they are truly identical, disclose they're truly identical, but they shouldn't be, almost never be truly identical, because if you did one proposal to NSF and another one to USDA, NSF has a $275,000 budget, USDA has a $175,000 budget. You wouldn't think you'd be doing the same work for both, for 175,000 or 275,000. You'd think that $275,000 would get you a little bit further. So when I look at it, if I change the inputs, I change the process, or I change the output, what is the output? If the research questions obviously change, any of those things change, to me, are different proposals. And that's sort of how I look at it. So that's why that's important. So we have this structure, that one way of thinking about it. And then you sort of end up, no matter what you do, you sort of end up back in this space, because we're going to see how this relates to the budget in a little while. And I sort of want to take like any questions people might have right now, and then take 5 minutes to grab some more water, and then go into the budget and talk about the budget, if that's okay with everybody. Is there any more questions?
We do have a couple of questions in the chat. One is about the IACUC number. What is an IACUC number?
That's what we need for the animal stuff. So each institution has one of those. I'm not sure where they saw that. Did they see that in the sample?
That might be.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the complexities of doing the animal testing, is that you need this number from from the institute. And so if you're aligned with the institute, it's not that big a deal. And phase one, animal studies are pretty simple, aren't that hard. You just have to jump through more hoops as far as protocols and things that you have to have in place before you probably should mostly have them in place before you do your proposal. So you'll have more sections of the proposal to fill out if you do the animal studies in phase one. And phase one, mouse, rabbit studies make sense. Bigger animals, it gets pretty expensive pretty fast.
Very good. Two more questions before we take a quick break. This one's from Maggie about citations in your aims statement. Do you include footnotes? That takes up a lot of valuable space. Does a bibliography need to be numbered in order of use? And if so, what order of documents should you start with, or alphabetically? How do you handle citations and those types of things?
So the way I handle them is I use them as endnotes. So I've almost completely gone to proposals I write for myself or for people I'm helping write. I've pretty much gone to Google Documents, which unfortunately doesn't have a note function. So I sort of jump through a hoops. I keep track of the citations and they become footnotes and take up room. But one of my last steps in doing the proposal is to export that to Word and then convert the footnotes to endnotes. And that's how I keep track of them. But yeah, if you're just using Word, I just do the citations as you go and do it in as an endnote format is all I do. There's some I'll use footnotes, like for instance USDA, NSF, you have more pages, and sometimes I'll use footnotes in those depending upon what I'm feeling like. But it's usually numbered, we're asserting and defending as we go, right? So if we're asserting something to be true, then one of the defenses is a citation of Dr. Huckleluck saying that that's true. So that's how I do that.
Very good. Oh, she has a follow-up, but if I use citations in my aims statement and my research proposal, that's the question. How do I list them? In one bibliography?
Mm-hmm.
In the one bibliography we need to upload?
Yeah, what I've been doing lately is, yes, I put all the documents in one Google Doc or Word document. So all the pieces, even though like the aim statement is one page, I put that in the same page that my research strategy goes. And so I'm trying to think if I have actual example. I can find an example of what that looks like. And then that way, when I start the citations, they start in the specific aims and then they go to, they just keep on numbering their way around. So that's how I do it.
Gotcha. Maggie, does that answer your question? I enabled you to talk if you want to expand on that question.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Just having the order confirmed would be super helpful.
The order?
Of aims, narrative, summary, then the research plan, like which.
Well,
the way that it gets downloaded for the reviewers, like you were showing.
Yeah. So if you look at it, let me stop sharing this and start sharing that other thing.
I'll put myself back on mute. Thank you.
Because I'm sure they've done it right. I mean, they got funded. It must be right. I'm just joking. Let's see. And some people don't put citations and names. I generally do, but this is how the order of this stuff is. So like specific aims and research strategy. So these are the attachments, and it sort of looks different, a little bit different nowadays, but specific aims. So they're actually putting their citations here. And let's see what they've done. And then you go into the research strategy, and yeah, so they're already up to 21. So they must, so they've numbered them all in the same order. And then if we go to the end here, it should be right at the end of this. Oh, see this vertebrate animals. So this is a section if you're doing animal studies stuff. This
There you
is
are.
kind of stuff you have to write. So it makes it for some of you researchers have no problem with that because you do it all. Yeah. So they just have their bibliography all numbered from the very beginning. So they included the same ones in their specific aims. And I know a lot of the researchers out there use different tools for, references and bibliographies and the like. I just try not to work with any of them. And this is a lot. Even for my most sciencey proposals, for a phase one, it's general. It's usually around 40 citations or something like that. This is a lot, but maybe that's why they won. Let's see, and then I'll just keep on going. So the other thing that's important is, and why we want to do that concept write-up. Now, they didn't include them. Is letters of support is usually at the very end. And maybe if I go back and look at another proposal, it might show it a little bit better. Let's see if we can find one that includes the letters of support. Let's see. Full application. Phase one. Let's try that one. Yeah, this one. So it looks like for these sample ones, they didn't include letters of support, it appears, which is sort of interesting. Because, well, I mean, I guess it makes sense because nobody wants to share their letters of support, right? Who their potential customers or funders could be. So that sort of makes sense. But that's the structure that you see is the last thing that you'd see is the letters of support is the way it works.
Dan, we'll do one more quick question about what is it okay? Is it allowed to submit to multiple agencies at the same time?
Absolutely, yes. Most multiple agencies now. Sometimes there's topics that, like for NSF, you might say, "Oh, my technology fits in advanced materials and in this environmental topic." NSF doesn't allow you to put it to multiple topics. NIH, on the other hand, is you can. Now, I'm not sure if this is exactly true. Now, I don't think you can anymore. You used to be able to submit a proposal to multiple institutes within the NIH at the same time, but I don't think you can do that anymore. But I could submit something to NSF and NIH at the same time, and they could be identical, but you can't take the money twice. So if you win both of them, which has happened to me once, and that's why I know this is very painful, is yeah, you have to select who you're going to take the money from. Or if you've already, and they don't come out in the same cycle. So you might have already taken the NSF money, even though the NIH money might have made more sense. And then they just, once you've already agreed to the NSF money, you can't switch horses at that point. But yes, you can submit, but I recommend not submitting identical proposals. I recommend breaking up the software and the hardware. If it's a medical device that has software and hardware, as much as possible. If you're doing some kind of a drug thing, development of the drug compared to the testing, if you have something, I mean, just figure out ways of, if it's a piece of technology where you need like I was talking, batteries or displays or something that, that are multiple proposals, you can break them up that way. So there's a lot of ways of breaking that up into multiple proposals.
All right. Well, that's all the questions we have. Great questions. Thank you very much. Let's take a 5-minute break. So bio break, and then we will start up again at 2:05 Pacific time, 2:05 in 5 minutes.
All right. So I think I'm back to this. So now we're going to talk about budget. Now, budget, keep in mind that the budget and that technical plan or work plan are completely tied together. They're sort of the same, they're the same puppy, sort of, in some ways. Um, so when we talk about budget, what's the phase one cost proposals, basically things we need to think about is we have direct labor, the salaries. So salaries, if you're a new company and you don't really have people on payroll right now, make sure that if you're hiring somebody, or you're going to hire somebody, or you're proposing to hire somebody, that you know the money that you're proposing to pay them sort of matches this as a Bureau of Labor Statistics. They have wages by region and by job type, and make sure it's sort of in line with that. It doesn't have to be exactly that, but I mean, don't propose, paying a computer programmer, well, $120 an hour as an employee, because when, the Bureau of Labor Statistics says it should be $70 an hour. That's just one way. I mean, sometimes, consultants are something different. We'll talk about that, but you know, we want to have employees, but we want to be able to justify the salaries that they're getting or the hourly rate that they're doing. All right. Direct expenses, consultants and subcontractors are limited to a third of the budget for SBIR. So if you're doing NIH, you got $306,000. That means $102,000 is the most that you can spend on consultants or subcontractors. For STTR, it would be 60%. And that's one of the reasons to do an STTR is if you're working with a research institute and you want to, and they're doing a ton of the work, is, you know, leveraging them, letting them get the 60% of the budget is a good way of doing that. Also, the other nice thing about STTRs is it allows you to use their PI instead of a company PI, because a company PI needs to be 50% employed by the company, whereas the STTR PI doesn't, is with the university. The other thing about key budget stuff, problems I see all the time, just don't put any equipment in for over $5,000, and even that much is too much. So keep they always turn it down. It always causes problems. They, you know, if you need a specialized piece of equipment, you know, find out if you can lease it. Find out if you can borrow it for the time periods. Find out if somebody else in your region has it that you can rent or use. But yeah, once you start putting in equipment over $5,000 into your budget, it just causes too much headaches. All right, so that's one of the other hints. Indirect expenses, always use their safe rate for their indirect expense. So it's usually, you know, USDA is 10% of the total direct expense you can do for indirect costs. NIH is 40% of, you know, it's 40% of something. I mean, there used to be a little argument. You can actually do 40% of the total direct cost, but once you throw on 40% on the total direct cost, especially if you have a lot of subcontracting, it gets pretty weird. I usually there use 40% of the salaries, direct salaries is usually what I use for the safe rate. NSF, it's 50% of direct salaries. I'm working with a client earlier today who has an NSF award, and he's submitting a NIH proposal. And actually for that one, just to keep things consistent, we're using their 40% safe rate on direct salaries, and then we added 10% fringe benefit to those salaries. So they're sort of end up in the same spot as NSF that way. All right. Fee. So fee is our profit for a small business, and they allow up to 7%, and we always take 7%. All right, so no matter what, we're taking 7%. So, and then the total project cost is the direct plus the indirect plus the fee. And a lot of times when I'm working with universities or clients that are from universities, a lot of times when they say, okay, it's a $500,000 budget, that's just for direct expense in their world. And then the indirects are budgeted for separate. In our case, in SBIR world, that $306,000 is directs, indirects, and fees. So everything fits in that budget. All right. And never, ever exceed the total award amount. Your proposal, that's one quick way to get rejected. So if the limit is $275,000 for NSF, you know, don't be $276,000 or $75,000 one, because some of that stuff is just automatically, they just, you know, it just goes in the hopper and in the trash. So always be exact there. Now, NIH actually has a lot of topics in NIH that are have these budget waivers. So you can talk to the program manager and get a budget waiver. So because a lot of their work is pretty expensive, especially once you start doing animal studies and other things. So you can talk to the program manager about your project, say you need a budget waiver that, phase 1 for 306 isn't going to work, but, I can get it done for 375 or 410 or something like that. I mean, I haven't ever seen anybody ask for, 306 isn't going to work, but for $3.8 million, I could do it. Can I do that? I've never seen that. I think the limit of the budget waiver is 50% more than the base amount. So I think for a phase 1, it would be 450 instead of 306, something like that. You have to read the rules, and I'm not sure if I'm not sure if DoD is very specific on their topics of what the budget is because it is a contract. But basically just have to follow the rules, make sure you do that. All right, a little accounting, sorry, type thing. But here's another way of looking at this. We've got the total cost, but we have direct costs, indirect costs, and our fees and profit. And indirect costs, so that 40%, if we're talking NIH, is really it covers general management, the accounting, other bids and proposals, phones, utilities, different R&D. That indirect cost is covering all that type of stuff. If you're doing a budget and you need a budget a lab that's directly related to your project and it's a direct expense, then you can include that. So if you are getting a piece of equipment or material and supply that is specifically for that project and that project only, then you can make it a direct expense. If you're looking at computers for just general computers for the office, they belong in indirect expense, so you don't put computer costs in your budget. Now, if you're buying a computer that has some, that is, doing some special AI thing or some special measurements or something that's directly related to the project and isn't going to be used in any other projects, then then you can put it in direct expense. But otherwise, if you're going to surf the web on it, if you're going to use it for email too, if you're going to do your accounting on it, it belongs as an indirect cost. And I'm sure everybody has 1,000 questions around this, but it's pretty straightforward. And to me, it's like what we want to do in a phase 1 is set up everybody up for success, that to follow the rules as much as possible, or to follow the rules, period. And to have the structure correct so that when you're applying for the phase 2 and they're doing their due diligence and ask to see your financial statements from the last year, that you'll have everything broken up and be able to identify things correctly for people. So here's some more, I fixed that. Here's some more budget concepts. I mean, so what they're looking for at some point when they say, hey, we'd like to give you guys an award, they're going to come to you with all these questions about your financial systems, what you have in place. Do you have a chart of accounts? They want to see certain goals as far as quick ratios, some different financial ratios that they might do. They want to see that even if you aren't keeping time, and that's going to be one of the things that you'll end up having to do if you don't have a timekeeping system in place, that you have the plan for the timekeeping system. And it can be something as simple as a paper form where you're keeping weekly time track of your time by project. So that you have a chart of accounts, that you do job cost accounting, so you're segregating between the cost between the different projects. type of thing. You have internal and best practices for accounting as far as paying bills and controls and around that. Those are the things that are important to think about when you're getting close to an award. That when you're doing your budget, it's helpful to have this in the back of your head. So let me show you just a worksheet that we can talk about. How, let me stop sharing and I'll share a worksheet. Because there's a lot of different people have different templates that for here. Now I have to find the right worksheet. All right. And all right. And this is something I made up, I don't know how long ago, a billion years ago. And these things have changed quite a bit, but here are the main components, and let's talk about the main components, and then we'll talk about this stuff on the side here. So the main components is senior personnel, basically the PI, other key personnel. When you look at key personnel and this other personnel, this category A and B, those are really, look at those as employees of the company. All right, those are our employees. And I do things by hour is how I keep track of things. Some people like to use months or hours per week. I do hours for the project is how I do it in my head. I mean, everybody does it different, once again. But you know how many hours, you know what their rate is. And you come up with the funds that you're requesting for that. For here we have a PI who is some unknown PI thing. But that's, hopefully you guys can see this okay. Let me blow it up a little bit more. And same thing in other personnel. All these forms are sort of, when you go into grants.gov and you're uploading stuff, it's really more oriented towards researchers or universities. So you have a lot of categories that probably don't make a lot of sense for a small company, postdoc, other graduate students, undergraduates, things like that. They have this category with secretarial, which in my world would be part of your indirect expenses. You probably, unless they're doing something specifically for the project, I probably have them under indirect. But you start adding up all these salaries, have $101,000. Fringe benefits is, I don't like charging those as direct expense. I prefer them be part of the indirect rate, but you can talk about it. This total equipment, I prefer not to see anything in the equipment bucket for phase one, but if you are putting something in there, it needs to be under $5,000. All right. And then you might have some domestic, you'll never have foreign travel. You might have some domestic travel for your project, but things that aren't allowed or unallowable costs for this are conferences. You can't go to a conference. You can't pay for that workshop out of that. You can't, you can't do foreign travel. You can't go to Canada or somewhere else to a conference. So there's a lot of, the travel is sort of, keep that really tight. Don't think about travel, and you're ultimately going to have to justify any travel. So if you're thinking about using a piece of equipment in phase two, or you want to see a testing of a piece of equipment, then you have to travel to North Carolina to see that piece of equipment. Those are the kind of things that make sense. If you have a consultant that needs to travel in for the project to be there live, that makes sense. So think about those things in that regard. This section here, participants support costs, you'll never have that. So I'm not sure why that's even there. And then we have these categories called other direct costs, which is materials and supplies is in there. So you come up with some whatever materials and supplies you need. You'll never use publication costs because those are an unallowable cost, even though the category, you'll see the category when you're doing your forms online, but it's unallowable. Consultant services, that is a 33% max. If it's an SBIR, so, and that 33% includes both of these things, both the subawards, subcontracts, and the consultants. So keep that in mind. That's usually the thing that's messed up mostly, because most of the time everybody's leaning on consultants in their phase one. So just keep in mind, you know, a $306,000 budget, you can do $100,000 in consultants and 102 in consultants and subawards. And the subawards, subcontracts, any outside people that are doing stuff is sort of what counts as that category. All right. So that's how that works. So that gets you their total other direct costs, and then this is the total direct cost. But here we get to our indirect, and so remember how I was saying that in this case it's a NIH and we're using 40% of salaries. So we have $101,000 of direct salaries that we're using a 40% rate, and that gets us an indirect cost of $40,000. We get that. Then it's adding these things together. So the total direct cost plus the indirect cost to get us the total direct and indirect. And then on top of that, we get our 7% fee. And that gets us up to, I think that's what's allowed right now. The limit for NIH is 306,872. And I don't know, I'm sort of weird this way, but if the amount is allowed is 306,872, then it's usually 306,872 if I'm doing the budget, because there's no advantage, absolutely zero advantage of coming in at $250,000 or $225,000. There's no advantage of that, because the cost of what you're doing doesn't come into play at all. So keep that, especially in the granting agencies. There's probably some question of cost for the contracting agencies, but for the granting agencies, if you're doing that, just whatever they're allowing, ask for it all, or make the work plan, get the work plan to match the budget. And that's what we're trying to do, is match the budget and the work plan. So I see the question from Karen. Thanks, Karen. So outside service group, so a subcontractor to a subawardee, and a subawardee is once again, that's more of the NIH talk there, but a subawardee is usually, I think of those really big grants that are $50 million over 10 years, and it's split between 8 institutions, and there's a lead institution of UCLA, and then there's subawardee institutions that is, you know, University of Oregon and, you know, Boise State and wherever. Those are subawardees usually, and a lot of times they have their own budget. They sort of control the stuff. They actually ask for money back and stuff. When we're talking about STTRs, they're sort of talked about in the context of a subawardee, although you'll be paying them, the small company will be paying them, which is, you know, they're not asking for the money from the government. You know, the company, the awardee is going to be paying them. So in my head, a subcontractor compared to the subawardee for SBIR world, STTR is fundamentally the same thing. Because even if it's a STTR where you have a research institute that's getting 60% of the money, the money's coming to you first. It's your responsibility to pay them. It's a small company's responsibility to pay them. So it's a little bit different in that regard. So I would think about it that way. Let's share that again. Does that answer that question? But it is really, I wish for SBIR, I wish all these things were put together, the subaward, the subcontract, the consultants. I wish they were all on the same line, because that way people wouldn't make that mistake. And it's something that every time I work with anybody, that especially people doing software, because everybody's looking for outside consultants to do their software, and they're expensive resources, and it's pretty easy to get over the 1/3 of the budget pretty quick. Let's see. I think that's it. I mean, I'm open for some questions. I'm happy to talk about some of the other pitfalls of the finance stuff. Happy to talk about the a lot of the capacity. You guys in Arizona have a really great resource, and I think she's going to come visit us next time for a second, to talk to us about now you won an award, now what. But that's what, and her name's Melissa Tomlinson. She's out of Tucson, so she's an amazing resource. I've been working with her for not quite 20 years, but pretty close. I guess I'm getting old. The moral of that story is I'm getting old. But those are the, I'm happy to chat about anything you guys want to chat about, or we can just go away.
Dan, there are a couple other questions that haven't been answered in the chat yet. And this is going back a little bit into the last hour, but first question would be, what is safe rate?
So when you read your RFA, your solicitation, there'll be a description. It's usually about a paragraph long, talking about the indirect rates, and in there they'll say what's allowed. So if you're working at a university, if you're at a university, you have the difference between a safe rate and contracted rate is that, like, a university has been audited, they've come up with this rate that is approved by the government. And us as small businesses at this point don't have that rate. So what they have is this safe rate. So as long as you ask for less, that rate or less, they won't audit you. You don't have to do any hoops to jump through to get that. So I would always use, there's no reason not to use a safe rate, because everything else is just going to hold you up. Because it can take years to get an audit to come up with your own rate, and you're going to be done with your project before that. So that's the difference. If everybody looks at at universities and stuff, their indirect rates are usually somewhere between 40 and 55, 60% is what they do. But the safe rate is what is in the solicitation. It'll say this is what's allowed. NSF sort of has been changing around a little bit over time, but right now I believe it's 50%, although I haven't read the new solicitation, but it's 50% of direct labor. So that's a safe rate. You can ask for less than that. I generally, I'm not a big fan of asking for less, because I think same thing with the fee. Sometimes I have clients that say, oh, okay, well, I don't have enough money to do this, let's cut the fee out. And the fee is sort of your slush fund, your contingency fund, or your alcohol fund, whatever. That fee money is so important, because you can do anything you want with that money. That's profit. That's truly, you you can put it in your pocket and say this, well, this is my profit for this project. Usually people spend the money on something having to do with the project. There's those unallowable costs that we talked about that, you know, conferences are unallowable, alcohol is unallowable, patent expense is unallowable in SBIR. You can't do any of that intellectual property work that needs to be done. You can't do that in SBIR. I mean, that's what you use the fee for. To me, when I see a proposal without that, when I'm reviewing and see a proposal that didn't include fee, it makes you question whether they're, you know, a sophisticated enough business person, I guess, to, you know, are they credible as a business person? Because like any business person, if they're allowed 7%, they're going to take it. And sort of the same thing with the indirect. Sometimes I see indirects that are a little bit less, and that's okay. But if you have an indirect rate at 10% or 5%, it's, especially if you're including your fringe benefits in there, that raises a lot of red flags to people.
Mhm. That's really helpful. Kelly's asking, in your experience, can you ask for computers since they're less than 5K and might be considered a supply?
Now, I would, if it's just a general computer, it would be in the indirect. It's sort of like having a desk, right? Nowadays, it's sort of like having a desk or an office. It's, you know, it's like, you know, part of the day-to-day work stuff. It's not, unless it's really specific to the project. That the only reason I have, you know, I've done that with tablets where I've bought 40 tablets to do testing. I've done that with tablets where I've put them in as a direct expense because the only reason we were buying those tablets were for that project. So you can get away with that, but you know, even if it's a computer for a programmer that's you're only bringing on for this project, it's just that it's going to raise some questions. So, you know, you just got to justify it. So the other thing we have are these things called budget justifications, which are usually run from, you know, 2 pages to 20 pages. And a lot of times people will put a lot of different information in the budget justification, but in your budget justification, you're going to go through each category and justify, why am I spending $3,000 on a computer? How is it a direct expense to the project? You know, and I, you know, if I had to buy this one kind of computer because it's, you know, super fast and, you know, it's crunching all this data that's, you know, coming out of my, you know, all this data that's coming out of my research, then that's one thing compared to, oh, I need a computer to answer emails and stuff, or this programmer needs a computer for, you might be able to get away with a programmer computer, but it just gets weird. I would try to stay away from it.
That's great. Another question: if you complete your phase 1 award prior to the completion date, is that when you apply to phase 2? Talk a little bit about the timeline for applying for phase 2.
Yeah, the timeline. So you can apply for a phase 2 anytime. Well, once again, read the solicitation because we're sort of talking to all agencies here.
Yep.
And some of them have multiple windows for phase 2s, and some of them per year. Some of them, like USDA, only have one. On some of the contract agencies, there's actually, it might actually be in your contract when you're going to be applying for the phase 2. What date is expected and what are your deliverables before you can apply for the phase 2. But with NIH, mostly NSF, and yeah, and mostly NSF, I mean, you can pick the next window that's available. So they still have sort of like phase ones where you have this window that, like, we're coming up on a due date for NIH. So we have this window that's due on September 5th. So there you can put in your phase one and your phase two and fast track or whatever. So like, let's say that you finished your project, on December 31st and the next due date is January 5th, you could submit your phase two in January 5th. And then probably have an answer by May or June of whether you were awarded the phase two. So there is a pretty big gap between it. And it sort of gets worse for some of the other agencies, like USDA. If you finish your phase one really early, it doesn't really matter that much because, it was probably awarded to you for early May. You finished at the end of December. The phase two is due in February. So, I mean, if you finished it in August, you don't get to submit your phase two any faster. So you can do it. I've submitted a phase two award application or a phase two proposal. Back in the old days with NIH, you could resubmit phase two. So there was a case where we were awarded a phase one, like on, let's say, May or June 30th. And there was a window for submitting a phase two that was July 20th, say. And I submitted the phase two for July 20th. And we had almost all the work done. We hadn't done the final report, but we had almost all the work done. But yeah, that didn't get funded that time. It got funded the next year. That was one of the cases with NIH, a special call that only gets funded once a year, and we were trying to get rid of a year of wait time. But I mean, we can, yeah, if you got a specific thing, I mean, you try to match those time periods up as close as you can, because a month's delay is, you don't want to wait a year for the next windows.
Yeah. Let me follow up on that question. I know it's been a while since I've applied for an SBIR at NSF, but it used to be you had two windows. You had like 6 months. You could either apply 6 months after the award date, or you could apply 12 months after the award date. Is that still the case, or has that changed to apply for the phase two?
I think it's changed. I think it's
okay.
The windows are open. I think for the phase two, for most of these agencies, you have to, like, no NIH, you have to do it at the end of your phase one. You have 24 months to submit a phase two for NIH. Okay. NSF, I'm not exactly sure what it is, okay. but there is something to do that. You have to do it within so much time,
Yep. A couple other questions. Let me jump into this one just to keep things moving. When we're talking about subcontractors versus sub-awardees, what is the difference?
Yeah, and I sort of got that. They're really, for the small business, there is no difference. Let's do it that way. Yeah, I would treat them the same. Sub-awardee generally means it's a STTR and that's the research institute, but you're paying them the same way as you'd pay the subcontractor. So to you, it doesn't matter. The money's coming to you, and you're going to send it out based on their milestones or however you agreed to pay the sub-awardee or the university. So that's always fine that way.
Yeah, we're getting lots of good questions now. Jessica asks, the budget has amounts. Is there a work prospectus that needs to be submitted for each contractor?
Yeah. Yes. So generally with your budget justification, you'll have each category talked about. So for a contractor, I'm going to pay Dan Sewer, $12,537, and then you'll say, see letter of commitment and statement of work. So I might send you a letter plus a one-page attachment to the letter that is It's basically the statement of work for, $10,000. This is what you're going to do. I'm going to do these things. And those are all attached to the budget justification.
Yeah.
Also, if you had quotes for pieces of equipment that you needed or materials and supplies, if you had quotes, if you were going to spend a lot on materials and supplies, if that was a big number that somebody's going to say, whoa, how is that $40,000? I would include a spreadsheet with the quotes or the quotes themselves in that. So that's usually what happens. Same thing with the subcontractor. Or subawardee. A subawardee, usually you get a letter from a university and you also see their budget as a subawardee. So that's STTR. And the other thing about that is, even though it's still your budget, the subawardee will give you from the university will give you a budget that's sort of formatted the same way as your budget, as the one that we're going to be looking at or you're going to be doing. But but you input the data, but they'll have sort of a budget justification for their own work. And that'll be attached to their budget. So it's a little bit different in that regard, not hugely. But yes, anything that's you need letters of commitments from consultants. NSF used to be really picky about that because NSF actually limits how much consultants can be paid. So that's always a bit of a hurdle. So you need a letter from them saying that they're willing to work for that amount of money, and it's gone up quite a bit, but it's still pretty low if I remember right. I think it's like $125 an hour, or $1,000 a day, or something like that nowadays. So
okay,
it's better than it used to be, because it used to be $600 a day, which you can't really get anybody.
That leads right into the next question perfectly. Is there a percent effort that raises red flags when asking for salaries? For example, can your PI request full salary out of the project?
Well, I mean, so the PI is, keep in mind, I mean, if we talk about direct and indirect expenses, if that PI has any other role, like taking out the trash, like, doing anything else at all, doing accounting, doing, anything else for the business, any marketing, any other thing, it's hard to justify 100% of anybody's time. I've seen it happen. I've seen it get approved, but I also seen it raise a lot of red flags. Probably somewhere closer to 90% of the time. I mean, when you think about, how you work, because, like, for instance, taking a seminar, isn't directly related to the project, or probably wouldn't be directly related to the project. So a lot of those education or HR type things that would happen in a business wouldn't be a direct expense for the business. So in my head, I have a hard time trying to justify 100% of somebody's time in that, or 100%, especially 100% of their time. Depending upon the agency, there's a lower limit also, which I think it's about somewhere around 10% for NIH. If a PI is dedicating less than 10% of their time to a project, that's going to raise red flags. So yes, it really depends upon the solicitation and the agency. So I would look at that, read those things. But it's a good question, though. That's a question that we get all the time. Because the other thing is, if you're employing somebody full time, that if the project's only paying for 90% of their money or their time, that other 10% has to come from somewhere, right? So it needs to come from those indirects that you're collecting or from the fee. But if they're only working on the project, if you're paying for 100% of their time and they're only working 90% on that project, then you have to come up with that other 10% of the money somewhere.
Very good. Next question comes from Lou, and you mentioned this a little bit, but he says a lot of clients he works with have a problem a little bit with overscoping the project.
Yeah.
How do you make sure you're not telling the agency you're doing more than you really need to be asking for.
Well, let's go back here. Let me stop sharing this and go back to that budget sheet again, because I didn't get to talk, or I forgot to talk about something here. So one of the things I do, so the main reason things get rejected, proposals get rejected, is that they're overscoped. That's the number one reason. Well, I think that's what they say. I mean, but overscoping the project, or not clear objectives, but then overscoping it, is the number one reason that things don't get done. And one of the things, if I'm working with somebody you get a sense after you read a lot of these things or look at a lot of these things, you get a sort of a sense of how much work something is. So a lot of times that's what these columns are doing on this worksheet over here is it's like, I'll make them actually break up the hours. So like in this example, I think there was 900 hours, and I'll go back to them and say, okay, well, so you got these 3 specific aims with these tasks. Tell me how many hours each person, put your hours in for each task. Let's figure out how much time this is really going to take. And usually when somebody does that, they'll get to a point where they say, oh, okay, this is too much work. I have 2 hours left for something that's going to take 2 weeks, So that's one of the ways for me trying to force somebody, but people can do this exercise themselves, but you have to think about it in the aim and the task, how much time is that really going to take? And I think I told the story last time, and I'll tell it again, that that I put, I think the first 6 or 7 proposals that I helped write all got rejected. And from early on, everybody was saying, hey, these are over scope. These guys are trying to do too much work, and rejecting them. And I mean, I guess I'm a slow learner or something, or we are. But this is from Enixall there in Phoenix. But we finally said to ourselves, it's like, okay, if they want us to do less work for the same amount of money, we'll do less work for the same amount of money and get done whatever we want to get done, or whatever we can. So, and that's what we did, is as soon as we started lowering the scope, we started winning. So so yes, it's hard. It's hard for us small business people, because we get so much done, and a lot of these reviewers are from the academic or government or someplace else, so they're not used to working quite at the pace that small business is. So their expectations of what can be done is a little bit different.
Yeah, that's good. I do want to, I know there's still some questions out there, but I do want to wrap up a couple of things before we shut it down for the day. I did put Dan's email address in the chat again. Dan, remind us again of, if participants want to reach out to you and set up a time to talk, you're asking for a summary of their project. Remind us again what they need to send you before before we set up a time. Uh-oh, did we lose him?
All right, I can't start my video, it says again. But so you have to turn me on.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that, guys. I clicked on the wrong button, but
Let me there you go. Should be okay now.
all right. Yay. All right, so let's see if I can do this without clicking on the leave button. All right. So let's share that, and I'll find the slide from last time. there were three main things. The concept write-up was the main one.
Mhm.
And all right, registrations, get them done. Concept write-up, this to interact with me, I need concept write-up. I'd like a summary of the technical research that's happened out there, sort of the market research, and sort of a dream team list. But certainly the concept write-up is the main thing that I need.
Mhm.
And happy to do that. And between workshop 2 and workshop 3, if somebody has, can get together their work plan, or even just an outline of the work plan and sort of an outline of the budget, what that looks like. If you can get me those two things, I think we can talk about. I'm happy to have a call around those with anybody, but I need the concept right up first, so
Yep.
don't start with the work plan. I need concept right up first.
Yep.
But
all right, more homework. Very good.
Well, I'm happy happy to have those conversations, and there's some fun ideas out there and lots of opportunity. And the other thing I'm happy to do is, once you get me a concept write-up, I'm happy to talk about what agencies might make sense to look at that. When we go back to this, it's sort of the very beginning thing of all these different, all the different agencies and sort of the categories that they have. Some of these are pretty interesting, like the health and the biomedical stuff. I mean, National Science Foundation, NIH, Department of Defense has a big chunk of that. The Department of Ag, there's pieces that can go in Department of Ag. So and I'm happy to talk about the technology in that context. I mean, some of these take a lot more work to hunt down, like Department of Energy, because it's, once again, they're doing, sometimes they're pretty specific on what they're looking for. Same thing with DoD, but we can, I think that's what's valuable. I mean, the things, to me, if I were taking advantage of myself, I think, sort of having my help hunting around, trying to figure out where this stuff could live. The concept write-up of, telling the story quick enough and easy enough that you can ask program managers or potential partners for that help. And sort of that tying up the work plan to the budget, keeping that tight. I think those are the places where most consultants should be helping you the most. That's usually where most of the work has to happen.
All right. Well, I'll make a couple. Thank you, Dan, so much. We'll be joining. We'll be here again. I believe it's Thursday, September 11th, for the final workshop. And so, if you would like to get some one-on-one assistance from Dan, please do that concept write-up and a work plan outline and a budget outline. Get those things ready to go so that he can work with you. Couple of things. We are the Arizona Innovation Challenge closes on the 31st at the end of this month. So I want to remind you all of that. That's $100,000 in non-dilutive funding. So that is coming up quick. You can find that information out on our website, as well as the AZ Fast Grant program has opened up again. Opened up last week. We did an info session on that as well, which is available on the ACA website under the Startups and Innovation section. And that is a $3,000 grant to help people who are getting ready to apply for an SBIR phase 1, the opportunity to hire someone like Dan to consult as you are writing your proposal. So check us out. Email me if you have any questions about any of those things. And again, thanks, Dan. Thank you all for attending.
Hey,
and
Riley, let me throw
yes,
in
sir.
one more thing.
Yes.
So our last workshop, like, I don't know, probably the first half hour, 45 minutes, I'm going to get a couple people from different agencies, like a contracting one versus a granting agency, to sort of talk about what reviewers are thinking or what they're looking at. So I think from that side, I think some people will probably get some benefit of a little bit of benefit from that approach.
Absolutely.
So just a heads up on what's coming up. All right.
Great. Great. And also a reminder, I thought maybe you were going to mention the registrations. So I got my UE user, what is it? The UEI number?
The unique
Unique
entity
entity
identifier.
identification.
Yeah.
Yes. I got my number about a week ago. So those things sometimes take time. So make sure that
Yep.
you look back over those registrations and get started on that early.
Yeah. And they take time, and there's a plethora of opportunities this time of year. So there's
All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time. Have a great weekend.